I want you to do something right now. I want you to close your eyes and think about the last time you walked into a high-stakes social environment. Maybe it was a wedding, maybe a corporate networking event, maybe just a crowded bar on a Friday night where everyone seemed to know a role they were already playing. And if you really pulled back and watched that room, like a director watching the stage from the wings, you would have seen something that would have chilled you to your core. Because what you were looking at wasn't a party. It wasn't a networking event. It was a machine. A perfectly calibrated social machine, running the same program it has been running for thousands of years. You see the guys desperately trying to occupy the alpha slot. They are loud. They are expansive. They are constantly scanning the room, not because they're confident, but because they need the room to confirm that they exist. Their entire identity is one bad night away from total collapse. Remove the audience, and the alpha disappears. He isn't powerful, he's dependent. He just found a more socially acceptable way to beg. Then you see the betas, working overtime to manage perceptions, playing the good soldier, laughing a little too hard at the right jokes, angling themselves near whoever has the most status in the room, hoping some of it rubs off. They aren't followers because they're weak. They're followers because at some point, someone convinced them that approval was the same thing as safety. And then, if you know what you're looking at, you'll see someone else entirely. He might be off to the side, or he might be right in the middle of the whole circus, completely untouched by it. He isn't competing for the loudest voice. He isn't tracking who's watching him. He isn't running any of the usual social software. He looks like a literal glitch in the matrix of modern masculinity. Like he's watching a film in a language he doesn't need translated because he already knows how it ends. This is the Sigma. And if you have ever felt like a stranger in your own social world, like you were handed a script for a play you never auditioned for, I need you to hear this right now. That feeling is not a flaw. That feeling is not a sign you're broken, or less than, or socially defective. That feeling is a signal. It is your system rejecting a program that was never actually designed for you. Now, before we go deeper, I want to hear from you. Down in the comments, what was the exact moment you realized the tribal game was rigged? When did you first feel that cold clarity? That the prize everyone was chasing wasn't actually a prize you wanted? I read everything down there because that's where the performance stops and the real mechanics begin. That's where this community stops being content and starts being something that actually matters. To understand what it really means to be a Sigma, you have to understand what I call the legacy script. The blueprint society hands every man the moment he takes his first breath. For most of human history, your survival was literally tied to the pack. Get exiled from the tribe and you died, alone, in the dark. Your brain learned this lesson so well that it encoded it at a cellular level, which is why the hunger for status and belonging isn't weakness. It's ancient biology doing its job. The problem is that we are now living in a 21st century world while running 100,000-year-old software. The legacy script tells you your value is measured by your tribal utility, how much you can provide, how many people you can lead, how convincingly you can perform the approved version of masculinity, the one built around dominance, competition, and the accumulation of external proof that you matter. And the alpha? He's the ultimate product of this system. He looks like he's won the game, but he hasn't won anything. He's just become the most efficient servant of the machine. The moment the crowd stops clapping, his entire identity evaporates. That's not power. That's the most sophisticated cage ever built. The Sigma is the man who walked up to that assembly line, looked at what it was producing, and walked off the factory floor. But let me be clear about something, because this is where most people get it wrong. The Sigma isn't antisocial. He isn't broken. He isn't shy or avoidant or afraid. He is something far more dangerous to the status quo. Because when you stop participating in a hierarchy, something extraordinary happens. You gain the ability to see it with absolute clarity. You see the strings. You see the hidden insecurities underneath the performances. You see the agendas, the power plays, the approval seeking dressed up as confidence. You see the entire architecture of the social machine because you're no longer inside it with your vision blocked by your own need to perform. This is what I call strategic disdain, not contempt for people, but a clear-eyed rejection of a system that was always designed to consume you. The Sigma has looked at the enormous cognitive and emotional cost of performing social perfection, the constant monitoring, the status management, the exhausting theater of dominance, and made a rational calculation. The cost is too high for what it returns. So instead of reading from someone else's script, he writes his own. He builds his values from the ground up. He defines success on his own non-negotiable terms, not his father's terms, not his boss's terms, not the algorithm's terms, his. He trades the hollow applause of a crowd for something quieter and far more powerful, the unshakable certainty of his own internal compass. There's a deep parallel here that I've talked about before when it comes to gay men and what I call the outsider's edge. When you are born into a world where the standard blueprint simply does not fit you, whether because of your sexuality or because your brain organically rejects tribal hierarchy, you are forced into a masterclass in human psychology. You have to learn how people actually work beneath the surface, just to survive a world that wasn't architected with you in mind. And that creates a specific, almost weaponized form of resilience. You stop being a passenger in your own life. You start becoming the driver. You realize that the rules everyone else treats as gospel are mostly just management tools, designed to keep the tribe predictable and the machine running smoothly. But this is where I have to stop, because we don't do soft truths here. We have to look at the shadow, the dark side of the Sigma that nobody talks about because it's uncomfortable and because it requires a level of honesty that most people aren't ready for. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the lone wolf identity isn't a conscious choice. It's a protective program. It's a sophisticated freeze response that your brain built to keep you safe after the people who were supposed to protect you didn't. I call this the tribe wound, and it runs deeper than most men are willing to admit. If you realized early that the love you were supposed to receive had conditions attached, if the home team's loyalty came with strings, if the people who should have been your safe harbor were the ones you most needed protection from, your brain made a very logical decision. It decided that the safest move was to vanish, to become so self-contained, so self-sufficient, that no one could ever have enough of you to hurt you. And that decision can quietly calcify into what I call the dark Sigma, a cold Machiavellianism where you use people before they can use you, a total avoidance of real intimacy, because intimacy feels indistinguishable from surrender, a hidden inauthenticity, where you become so good at being a ghost that you start haunting your own life. Here's the hard truth. If you are running away from the tribe still owns you, because they are the ones dictating your movement. You are still dancing to their music. You've just changed your position on the floor. That is not sovereignty. That is just a more elegant form of captivity. True sovereignty, the kind that actually changes how you experience being alive, is something different. It's the ability to walk into the middle of the pack, understand every game being played, and choose not to play. Not out of fear, not out of unhealed wounds, but out of genuine, uncoerced disinterest. That distinction is everything. One is a man who's escaped, the other is a man who's free. And the path from one to the other runs straight through integration. It means taking the parts of yourself that the tribe told you were weird, or wrong, or too much, or not enough, and making them the foundation of your power rather than the source of your shame. Think about the people who have shaped history, the ones who genuinely moved the needle. The inventors, the artists, the philosophers, the builders of things that didn't exist before they imagined them. Almost none of them were the guy getting the loudest applause in the room. Almost all of them were the person standing slightly outside the circle, watching the game with clear eyes, asking questions no one else thought to ask. Your outsider status isn't a defect in your design, it is the feature. It is what makes you capable of seeing the flaws in systems that the insiders are too invested in to question. You don't need to lead the tribe. You don't need to follow them either. What you need, the only thing that will actually satisfy that deep hunger underneath all the noise, is to be real. Completely, uncomfortably, non-negotiably real. In a world built on carbon copy performances, being an original isn't just admirable. It is the most radical act of resistance available to you. The lone wolf is a beginning. It is not the destination. The destination is becoming a man who is so genuinely at home in his own skin that the tribe's judgment registers as background noise. Not because you've numbed yourself to it, but because you've built something inside yourself that is simply louder. Every time you choose your truth over the tribe's comfort, you are reclaiming a piece of yourself. Every time you refuse to perform a version of yourself designed for someone else's consumption, you are moving, inch by inch, from being a utility to being a human being. And that journey is lonely sometimes. I will not lie to you about that. There are nights when the silence is heavy and the path forward is not lit, but it is the only path that leads somewhere worth going. We are building something different here, a space where the masks come off, where the mechanics of what's actually happening underneath the performance are laid bare and examined without flinching, where the fog starts to lift and the strings start to snap, one by one. So, if this landed somewhere real inside you, if you felt that cold, quiet clarity that tells you the game being played all around you is not your game, stick around. We are going to keep digging until we hit bedrock. I'm David. This is the truth underneath the performance. I'll see you in the next one.